It is your Wednesday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a good one out there as well. Excellent show coming up. Chris Hine from the Star Tribune will join me here in just a few minutes. Talk Timberwolves. NBA draft starts tonight. A two-night draft, Wednesday and Thursday this year. Chris Hine not terribly excited about that. Wishes it was just a one-night affair. It is just 2 rounds. You don't really need that extra day, but here we are. An extra night of programming for the NBA and its affiliated partners, things like that. Maybe it'll become a thing. Maybe we won't regret it. Maybe it'll be fine. Wolves do have picks in both the first and the second round, 27th overall tonight and 37th overall early in the second round on Thursday. We'll see if they stand pat there. We'll see if they package those 2 picks to move up. We'll see if they make a trade otherwise for players, things like that. A lot of things they could do. Not a ton of dramatic needs they have, but certainly probably an eye toward the future and maybe the point guard of the future. Maybe a day when Mike Conley Jr. will not be the starting point guard here anymore. He is going to be 37 next year, which in human years isn't that old. It's a decade younger than I am, but in basketball years, starting to get up there. So Chris and I will talk about all those possibilities and everything else in a little bit here. Got some women's hockey thoughts at the end of the show, a little bit of soccer, some Twins here in a second. First, though, what did I miss? Let us start with the Lynx. Last night's game in the Commissioner's Cup, the championship of the Commissioner's Cup, did not count in the WNBA standings, but it counted for a lot of things. First of all, Lynx won 94-89 over New York. Road game. They win that game. Every player on the Lynx, they're playing for money. And anytime you get players playing for money, and the WNBA in particular, because salaries are not in the millions and tens of millions like they are in the NBA, but anytime you get players playing for money, I don't really care how much it is. There's an extra level of competitiveness because no matter how much money they have, they do want more. But in this case, it's a significant portion of their salary. Basically, every Lynx player for winning this Commissioner Cup championship gets $30,000. And that is meaningful in a league where the salaries are in the, high 5 figures and low to mid, sometimes 6 figures, mostly low 6 figures. That's a pretty good chunk of change. So winning that, they all pocket a good amount of money. More than that, though, they beat New York. New York's 15-3 this season. Lynx had already beaten them in the regular season. And again, this does not count in the standings, but Lynx 13-3 win this game, 7th straight victory. We can call it 7 in a row victories, even if it's not a regular season game. They've beaten a ton of good teams this year, and they are forcing the narrative to change, right? Like the WNBA is built up of all of these kind of super teams. That's how the league has become in the last couple of years. New York is a super team with all the stars they have on their team. Lynx have beaten them a couple times this year now. Lynx are not a super team. They're not built the same way as New York, as Vegas, teams like that have been, dominating the discussion for the last year or two. They are built around Nafisa Collier and to a degree Kayla McBride, but also a lot of complementary supporting pieces, not a super team, kind of more of a traditional structure where you're building around a star with complementary role players. And that has worked tremendously this year because those role players were expertly picked, because they have been, developing this chemistry from the jump this season. They are forcing their way into the conversation as a legitimate WNBA title contender this year. And this Commissioner Cup win, Nafisa Collier was the MVP. This Commissioner Cup win only adds to that discussion. We've talked about it a few times, but it is getting deeper into the season, and they keep playing the same way, keep having the same results, forcing their way into the conversation. As Cheryl Reeve said, you got to talk about the Lynx now, as we did on this show, and as a lot of people should be doing nationally in the WNBA media and fanhood as well. Twins, on the other hand, the fourth loss in, the last week and a half that just feels frustrating. All of them by one run. All of them, the Twins have made some sort of comeback, it feels like. They're right in the game, but 4 one-run losses. This one 5-4 in Arizona. They rallied. Ryan Jeffers hit a long home run, a 3-run homer to tie the game, but they gave up the go-ahead run not too long after that. It feels like a lot of missed opportunities in this game against Arizona. Diamondbacks are an okay team. They're like a 500 team. Twins sitting there with a pretty good record still, 43-36, but don't want to lose too many more of these kinds of games. It's 162 games. I get it, right? This is going to happen. You're going to have a little bit of a lull where it doesn't feel like things are going your way. If you can kind of break out of it, if you can not let it get to you, not let it get you down, try to find the micro positives within it. Like Byron Buxton's been hitting better lately. The offense seems like it's finding some life, things like that. They could get right back at it today with Simeon Woods Richardson pitching and win, feel good about themselves. But you don't want this to turn into any sort of slide or negative vibe because you've lost 4 games by 1 run in the last week and a half, all of them in sort of frustrating fashion. You got to keep that good energy going and try to escape whatever negativity comes from this kind of defeat. Speaking of kind of a negative vibe lately, Minnesota United soccer team was one of the kind of feel-good stories of the start of the year. Things have taken a turn for the Loons lately. A lot of roster shakeups, a lot of losses. They said goodbye this week to Kervin Arriaga and Victor Eriksson. Arriaga going to a Serbian club, Eriksson going back to Sweden. Things didn't work out for either one, trying to recoup some roster spots, trying to recoup some salary slots, things like that. The Loons have lost 3 games in a row after a great start to the season. They've been shorthanded because of injuries, absences, international play, things like that, kind of reshaping, retooling on the fly again. Got a transfer window coming up here in not too long. Maybe they can add some more pieces there, but it feels like the feel-good story has slipped away. And the vibes, like we talked about with the Twins, the vibes are changing with the Loons. Now, can they change it back? Can they get back into that kind of feel-good mode where they were, attacking in the right times, playing defense at the right times earlier in the season? We've had John Marthaler on a number of times this year to kind of talk about, is this sustainable? Can they keep playing like this? And it was always kind of a wait-and-see kind of thing. And just when you thought maybe it was late enough in the year to say, yeah, okay, this is for real, they've hit this slide here with a lot of absences and a lot of, poor performances lately. So can they get back on the right side of things? Can this kind of retooled roster, especially when they get players back from international play, can they kind of regroup and get back to where they want to be? I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think this year is like the end-all, be-all of what they're trying to accomplish, but you don't want to squander the kind of start they had to this season.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Let's bring in Star Tribune Timberwolves writer Chris Hine right now. No stranger to the show, of course, and good time to have you back on, Chris, because Wednesday is day 1 of the NBA draft. I'm sure you're thrilled that this is now a 2-day affair, right?
Over the moon about it. Yeah, love it that the draft is now 2 days. I remember Tim Connolly was advocating for this, the last couple of years, and I said no way. I said absolutely no way should the draft be 2 days. There's no good reason to have the NBA draft over 2. It's 2 rounds.
It's 2 rounds.
Figure it out. You guys can you plan all year. You can get this done in one night.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous that the NBA draft is over 2 nights.
I agree.
But anyway,
I don't think it should be either. But it is what it is. You got 2 nights of coverage because the Wolves have the number 27 and the number 37 overall pick, 1 in each round, baby.
That's right. Well, that kind of leads into what I want to discuss with you, which is, yes. So they're set up with those picks, right? But if anything has shown us in the Tim Connolly tenure, he's moved around he's made trades each of the last two two drafts that he's had here. So because they're starting from a certain spot or certain spots in this year's draft doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to end up in those spots by the end of
Okay.
this 48-hour process. I want to say draft night, but this
Yes.
48-hour process.
Yeah, that's fair. I think
Move
that's
up? Does he
fair.
try to move back? The first draft, his first draft here, he moved back
Yep.
and he got ended up with two picks. That was when the Wendell Moore and Walker Kessler
Right.
draft, and then last year he moved up into the early second round,
Yep.
using some I think future draft capital to jump into the early second round to get Leonard Miller, along with Jalen Clark with a later pick that they had. So I think it's with Tim Connolly. I think anything is on the table in terms of where you might see them picking tomorrow night. I'll ultimately see them picking whether it's tomorrow night or Thursday night.
What do you think they hope to accomplish in this draft? Are they, a lot of their feels like a lot of their previous drafts were, kind of aimed at, maybe future depth or, obviously even before they were a playoff team, they were trying to hit big. Obviously, Anthony Edwards, when you have the number one overall pick, you're trying to draft a star, but drafts like Jaden McDaniels, obviously that predates Tim Connolly's arrival, but this is a team in a
Mhm.
different point in its arc now. What do you think they hope to accomplish with these picks?
Yeah, I mean the consensus kind of among the fan base, everything seems to be that this is going to be where they try to take a swing at point guard of the future here. You have Mike Conley under contract for the next 2 years here, but he's going to turn 37
Yeah.
this season. So the consensus seems to be that you try to grab somebody who you think could develop into your point guard of the future in a maybe a year or two or something like that. So I think that's where that makes sense. That's where they're headed. This draft, from everything I've read, seems to be all over the map in
Yes.
terms of the talent pool, where guys may end up ultimately going. I think you look at these mock drafts, and it seems like no year uh, prior to this, in my 6 years covering the NBA, has the draft seemed more topsy turvy and
Right.
unpredictable in terms of where guys might end up going than this one. But that means there could be some opportunity, and that's why I think if Tim Connolly likes somebody who he maybe has a high draft grade on, that guy begins to fall. Does he look to be aggressive and try to move up into whether it's like the late teens or the
Yeah.
early 20s
Yeah.
to try to grab somebody he really likes? Because I think there is going to be a lot of unpredictability in the first round night. Um, so I think that seems to be the consensus. Point guard, but I think also ultimately Tim Connolly's, if he likes a talent and he made his reputation on the draft in Denver, um, he's gonna take somebody, whether it's the point guard or some other position.
Is some of this related to, a lot of the guys they've picked the last couple of years haven't gotten on the court very much because they've been pretty veteran heavy and, trying to see what they have with the more established players. Does some of this come down to we might think they have some needs, they might think they already have those needs kind of readily solvable with some of the guys that are already on the roster but haven't played very much yet?
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, do you need another wing to kind of join the group of Leonard Miller and Josh Minot that you
Right.
have right now? Kind of those are the guys that are supposed to be kind of next in waiting or next in line to be battling for those kind of rotation minutes at those positions. So that's why I think it makes sense to skew more for a guard or and obviously they have plenty of centers on the
Yes,
team.
no shortage.
So it just makes sense for this draft to be more guard focused than anything else because the last few drafts they have taken some forwards who they're high on and hope that they can contribute in Leonard Miller and Josh Minot, and they just have never really quite solved the backup point guard situation as of right now.
Is that, I guess it kind of depends on how the draft works. We saw San Antonio made a living at the bottom of the 20s, taking a lot of useful players during their seemingly never-ending dynasty. And teams do that. You wait for players to fall, and when other teams are loading up on, potential guys who could be good 2 or 3 years from now, you might get a guy that can help you right away. But with where they're drafting, it seems challenging to think you're going to find your point guard of the future. But maybe it's not out of the question, I guess.
It's not. Well, I mean, that's just it's the draft is a major crapshoot. So
Sure.
you never know. But that's why I think in a draft like this, when it's all over the place, there is opportunity. Guys, not everybody's going to be a flop. Everybody, some guys are going to hit, and can you identify which guys are going to hit, and without kind of a predetermined order of where like the first 10 to 15 guys are going to go, it could create a little more chaos and weirdness than usual on a draft night. So we'll see what kind of characteristics also that the Wolves are identifying. I think we know that Tim Connolly tends to prefer guys who are going to be good fits in the locker room. That seems to be uh, first and foremost. This is a culture of defense that they're building here in Minnesota. So if a guy can't really defend or is a weak defender, doesn't show promise on that end of the floor, I think you could probably assume that they're not going to be a fit long term for what the Wolves are trying to build here. And, ultimately, you're going to have a guy who is going to be a good initiator. Probably, you're looking for maybe a Mike Conley light in terms of like whether it's high basketball IQ,
Yeah.
ability to knock down an open shot. Because whoever this is going to have to play off of Anthony Edwards for the foreseeable future as well. And Anthony Edwards is going to have the ball in his hands a lot and be
Right.
the dominant scorer, uh, for the next decade. Wolves fans hope so. Um, I think you're looking for those kind of characteristics, and maybe not somebody who's going to come in and just try to take the reins, be a have the ball in his hands a ton,
Right.
who's able to play without the ball in their hands, but can still initiate the offense.
Kind of a Tyus Jones type, it sounds. He's probably not going to be available to them in free agency, but that's the kind of player that kind of jumps to mind when I think about, aside from a guy like Conley.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. That's kind of the prototypical mold. But Trey Jones, I think, is a free agent next season. So keep your fingers crossed. You never know, right?
You never know. Plus, you were talking about defense. We cannot overstate or overlook that Rudy Gobert himself was a number 27 pick, 11 years ago. So you
Yeah,
never know what you're going to get at 27.
yeah. And Tim Connolly, I think, made that pick and then
Yes.
traded it to Utah, which he,
Yes.
I think, eternally has regretted ever since ever since he did that. So yeah, I mean, well, listen, Jaden McDaniels was also a late
Yeah.
first round pick. So there is, like I said, there's value to be had here. There's value to be had in the immediate future, even if it's not necessarily, let's say this season,
Yeah.
right? I think it still could be, a year from now, if you find the right guy and he can develop at the right pace, as Mike Conley then let's assume it's a point guard,
Hmm.
as Mike Conley enters his age 38 season,
Yeah.
is this person now ready to grab a little more control of the reins? And so I think that's what you're ultimately looking at. They have some, they've had these guys in the pipeline like Minot
Yeah.
and Leonard Miller, who are who are seemingly getting better. Just haven't had the opportunity because the Wolves had
Right.
a pretty firm top eight slash
Yes.
nine all season. But with some offseason uncertainty, we don't know if Kyle Anderson's going to be back in
Right.
free agency. That might open up an opportunity for some of them. Um, but we'll see what they choose to ultimately to add to the mix here come draft night.
Short term and long term, whoever is selected and everybody else will be coached by Chris Finch. We learned Monday. Long term extension keeps him here another 4 years through the 27-28 season. Not a surprise. Teams like to announce these things around other pieces of news like the draft coming up. And he obviously led them to one of their two most successful seasons in franchise history, got them to the Western Conference Finals, coached the All-Star game, candidate for Coach of the Year. Like, obviously, this is someone they were going to look to extend, but probably feels good for them and for Chris Finch to get this done and to have that kind of long-term security figured out.
Yeah, I think it's a helpful move on a number of fronts. It gives Chris Finch a raise. We don't know the financial details, but it is a raise more commensurate with maybe where Finch's status is in the league
Yeah.
at the moment, especially after going to the Western Conference Finals and finishing third in the Coach of the Year voting. Um, he's seemingly comfortable here. He's a fit with almost everybody in the organization, right? And I think I made this point yesterday. I think one of the most impressive things about his tenure here is he's made it work with whoever has kind of been above him.
Yep.
Whether it was Gerson Rosas initially, whether it
Yep.
was Sachin Gupta for that 1 year when he
Mm-hmm.
was the interim president, or whether it's with Tim Connolly, Chris Finch has kind of made it work, made his style and his personality click with whoever. And, whether it's Glenn Taylor, Mark Lowry, Alex
Right.
Rodriguez, he's got a good relationship with all ownership parties. So, I think the political almost aspects of the job and just being a fit with the organization is not always easy in the
No.
NBA. It's not something you can take for granted. And I think with his kind of easygoing personality off the floor, he's very intense, obviously on the floor,
Right.
in a game, in a practice, but off the floor, away from the floor, he's about as easygoing as it gets. And I think that's really helped him really fit in well with this organization, which has had some turbulent times above him since he's joined in February of 2021.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even the circumstances in which he arrived were, a little not controversial is the wrong word, but there was the whole, he gets hired in the middle of the season after Ryan Saunders is fired. He comes in and there's no real, he's hired off of another staff. There's kind of a question of should they have done a wider search, things like that. But he's absolutely gotten the job done on merit. And the year 2 seasons ago was bumpy, obviously, and I think that if he had it to do over again, maybe he does a thing or two differently that year to try to get more out of that team. But his acumen came through this year in unlocking whatever was there to be unlocked, especially defensively, and really like making defense the priority on this team, recognizing that's the strength of this team, even though he comes mainly from a pedigree that's built more around offense.
Yeah, he built his reputation in the league by being an offensive mastermind, especially with some of the things he did in New Orleans and Houston. But it's you know I think he's very adaptable as a coach too. He doesn't really have just one certain way that he wants to play or can play. He's trying to adapt to the personnel that he has, and how does that fit? And he's assembled a really good staff. We'll see if Mike Conley ends up. The Detroit job is, I think, the only job that's currently open, and he's a
Yeah.
candidate for it. He's assembled a really good staff, um, and yeah, I think just overall he's been adaptable. And I think one of the things that people need to keep in mind too about an NBA coach is I think people when they look at coaching in the NBA, they look at the micro, right?
Yeah.
You look at, oh, he should have called a timeout
Right.
here, or he put out this terrible lineup for
Right.
3 minutes on in a game, right? But I think you need to also take a step back and look at the macro of how are especially young players developing under this coach.
Mm-hmm.
And all evidence has pointed to Anthony Edwards and Chris Finch being a very good pairing
Yeah.
so far in Edwards' career. Edwards has done nothing but get better
Yeah.
every season that Chris Finch has been his coach. So I think you need to keep that in mind when evaluating. And Jaden McDaniels too. Jaden McDaniels is now an all defensive player.
Yep.
We'll see if offensively he can continue to grow. But I think when you see young players like that developing under Chris Finch, I think it's a testament to him and his staff, and another reason why you want to have him around for the long term.
Yeah, I think those are good points. And it's not that he goes easy on Ant, right? Like he will get in, he will get on Ant, he will tell him this is what you need to do, and I think Edwards seems to appreciate that. He likes to know where he stands.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And has talked a lot about that before. He likes the hard coaching. He comes from a football background.
Right.
So he's used to people getting people getting in his face or what have you. So he's not going to shy away from that. And after the Game 7 win against Denver, Ant had nothing but high praise for Finch and the job that he did keeping the team focused and keeping him focused and the way that he just goes about coaching the team, which is no BS, no favorites,
Yep.
no pecking order. Everybody is one of 15 guys on the team, whether it's Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Town, or like Leonard Miller, Josh Minot.
Yep.
Everybody gets coached hard and treated the same, which is also not always the case in the NBA.
Final thing on this. I talked about this on Tuesday's show and wrote about it a little bit too, but it is not an illustrious list of all-time Timberwolves coaches. If you look at the list, a lot of guys have tried and failed, not necessarily their own fault. A lot of them were saddled with rosters that maybe nobody could have saved, but Finch already, even after
Right.
just, a few years here, he's already number 2 in regular season wins, playoff wins. He's number 1 in regular season and playoff winning percentage. It's him and Flip Saunders. Like those are the only 2 guys who have ever had any sort of success here. It's just kind of amazing.
It really is. In that long of a span of time, Chris Finch is already the second most successful coach.
There's only 2 guys that have won 100 games.
He's only been here a little over 3 years.
There's only 2 guys that have won 100 games. It's amazing.
And with a couple more deep playoff runs, he probably ends up making the case as the greatest Wolves coach.
I agree with
so
that.
We'll see what the future holds here. It's I remember thinking at the time, like I remember when he was like passing Tibbs and I was like, wait, Tibbs was second all time in coaching wins,
right?
And now Chris Finch in like year 3 was going to be passing him. Like that's just insane to me.
Well, Chris, this is a franchise that has 500 games under 500 for over 35 years. So you do the math and you know how bad it's been. Kurt Rambis himself is responsible for 100 of those games under 500 in just 2 seasons. So they have had their share of coaches.
It's not always. I mean, a lot of that's not always on the coach, right?
Of course not. Yeah, it's not just the coaches. They've drafted poorly. Guys have underperformed. Right. Like it's been a whole swirl of problems. But the coaches, unfortunately, are the ones that get saddled with those records. And I'll never forget. It is embedded in my brain. Kurt Rambis, 32 and 132. That is embedded in my brain for 2 seasons. That is his coaching record. Not all his fault. Mm-hmm. But some of it was his fault too. So I'm sure
it
Finch,
felt like it too. Yeah.
And Finch, not all to his credit, but gets his fair share of the credit. I think he's got a much better roster than so many of these guys ever had. But he's done a job with it.
That's 100% right. But it's the marriage of the talent plus the coach that has helped make this work for the last couple of years here.
Well, we'll see who else gets added to that mix Wednesday night and Thursday night. Chris Hine will have both nights of coverage. He's thrilled about both nights of coverage, first round and second round. Maybe we can add a third round some year and stretch this out over 3 days. Would you like that?
Don't get me started.
Okay. All right.
I mean, I've already complained enough on this podcast about how ridiculous that is. But yeah, if the NFL. I mean, the NFL does the 3-day thing, right?
It does 3 days, yeah.
But if the NFL can do rounds 4 through 7 on day 3, and it's just like come on. The NBA doesn't need 2 nights of this.
They're milking an extra night out of it. They're getting it. They're trying to make the second round feel more significant now. Is what they're trying to do. I think it's not just a throwaway round anymore. You don't just send out the deputy commissioner. It's all a bigger deal now.
Yeah, sure, whatever. I'm not buying it.
All right, Chris. Well, appreciate it.
All right.
Follow
Yep.
Chris's coverage one way or the other. And Chris, we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mike.
Great stuff from Chris. Like we talked about, draft starts tonight, a 2-night affair. We will see what the Wolves are able to do. It's not like this is a roster that needs a ton of work, but certainly a team that could use some more depth, could just certainly use someone who can make a three, someone who can be a primary ball handler, doesn't have to be starting caliber right away, but eventually you'd like to find that replacement at point guard. Can they accomplish that in the draft? What will they wind up doing starting tonight? We will learn that soon enough. And thanks again to Chris for joining me on today's show. Let us finish with the cooler. Two former Minnesota Gopher high school standouts. Standouts doesn't even probably do it justice. Legends going into the Hockey Hall of Fame in November. They just learned that on Tuesday. Natalie Darwitz and Chrissy Wendell-Pohl both going into the Hall of Fame as part of this induction class. That's amazing. That's great for them. Not surprising. Two of the giants of women's hockey. And obviously Darwitz has been in the news lately as general manager of PWHL Minnesota, helping them to the championship not too long ago, just a few weeks ago, but then getting ousted in sort of a power struggle is what it seems like it was. But now a piece of very good news for her and for Chrissy Wendell-Pohl, two legends in women's hockey, that induction coming in November. So congrats to them. I guess the only surprise to me is that they weren't in the Hall of Fame already, given their accomplishments all across all spectrums of hockey, and particularly with Team USA. That will do it for me today. Programming note for the rest of the week. Expecting to talk gymnastics on Thursday's show. The trials, U.S. Olympic gymnastics trials, begin Thursday at Target Center, Thursday through Sunday. We'll talk all things trials, all things U.S. gymnastics. We're expecting to do that with Jeff Day and Nyla Myers from our staff at the Star Tribune. Friday, going to probably talk NHL draft with Sarah McClellan. That draft starts Friday. Wild holding, a top 15 pick. We'll see what they can do with that. See if they can make some moves for the future that get them into a good spot. We'll also have a bonus episode dropping sometime this week. I was out at the All Metro Sports Awards, Star Tribune All Metro Sports Awards on Tuesday night, gathering some stuff, got some good stuff there, including an interview I did with Timberwolves big man Luka Garza, who had some great advice for young athletes, as well as some good insights into the Timberwolves, and former Iowa friend, Iowa star Caitlin Clark as well. So good stuff coming up the rest of the week. Hope you'll stick around for that. Until tomorrow, I am Michael Rand, back at it again on Thursday.